Never did my forestry book either.
So we're here today with Dale Burk here in the public library right in downtown Stevensville, Montana, on a beautiful summer day here in the Bitterroot on Thursday, July 24th of 2014. And I'm here with Dan Harper, who's very active in the Montana Wilderness Association on the council. And Dan does great work for the Shining Mountains chapter of the MWA out of the Missoula area. So I'm going to start off here with Dale. We've been talking about just some things, stories, and he's got great stories to tell. And there is so much to say about Dale as far as introductory comments. I hardly know where to begin, but I'll just make a few comments about Dale. Dale is, first of all, a native Montanan, third generation. He is also the brother of Stony Burk, lives up at Choteau, and we've had the pleasure of interviewing Stony in the past, and both are delightful people and conservationists going way back. Dale is from essentially northwest Montana. I guess I'd be more specific and say the Tobacco Valley, if that sounds all right with you.
And Trigo, Montana.
And Trigo, I didn't look that up. Where is Trigo?
It's 15 miles south, well actually 14 miles south of Eureka.
Okay.
And
About
it's about 2 miles off Highway 93, and it's just a little community on a high bench.
Yeah, down near Fort Time.
It's basically a post office and a store, and then a rural community. So.
Yeah. And he grew up in a logging family down there, so he knows the outdoors, working the outdoors, and enjoying the outdoors. Dale has had many occupations. He's worn a number of hats over the years. He's been a logger. He was in the United States Navy. He has a degree in philosophy from the University of Montana. He's been a newspaper reporter and editor for many years, was a columnist for the Missoulian in the outdoors section. He's been a photographer. I have one of his books, Dale Burk's Montana, which is a wonderful coffee table book, if you will, about Montana, its lands, and beautiful pictures. He's been in corporate communications. I'm kind of interested in that aspect. He's been a book author, a prolific author of books and many articles. Again, he's been a hunting guide, he's been a fishing guide, and he's got his own business, Stony Dale Press, so he is a book publisher also. He's won numerous awards, just a few of which to mention of importance. He's been the winner of the American Boaters National Conservation Award, that's in 1973. He's a National Trout Unlimited Conservationist of the Year, 1974. Montana Wildlife Federation Conservationist of the Year, 1972. That was a busy time for Dale, obviously. He has a lifetime membership, honorary membership of the Montana Wilderness Association, going back to 1970. And in 1975, and he was the first Montanan to receive this, the very prestigious Nieman Fellowship at Harvard, where he spent a year there in Cambridge as a fellowship there at Harvard. He's been the author of several books, just a few of which I'll mention that I've read, called Great Bear Wild River, which is a book that was very important in establishing the Great Bear Wilderness, The Clear Cut Crisis, the Montana book that I mentioned, a great photography book, A Brush in the West, and that's just a small example of things that Dale has done. So I'll let Dale kind of go from here and start talking about what he wants to talk about.
Oh boy, so open-ended.
Yeah, we can maybe start with those generic questions if you like. About your background. I like biographies, and I like the formative years of people, and what molded them to become who they are. So particularly if you'd like to talk about that.
Well, I'll quickly mention that, and this is one of the, there's another relationship that didn't get mentioned here, and it's a man named Stuart Brandborg, who's been very influential as a friend and as an advisor and as a confidant over the years. And one of the things on the theme that you were just talking about, how are we shaped to come to the person who makes internal decisions based on what? And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my relationship to growing up in a logging family, of living in the outdoors, of taking the outdoors on its own terms at various points in my life shaped how I approach looking at the landscape and how I look at the people who make their living there. And I've remembered one experience that I was at a hearing in Lolo, Montana, on the issue of wilderness in the Bitterroot. And one of a person who was a friend, but with whom I disagreed on the dimension of wildland involvement, disparaged at that hearing, disparaged loggers. And I got up and said that while I am known as a wilderness advocate and I fight hard for wilderness, I grew up in a logging family, and this fellow had really disparaged the logging voice in forestry management. And I made a statement that as much respect as I held and hold for my father, and he had used the word that I could never see loggers as sons of bitches, as he referred to them, because I knew from the voice that my father gave me to look at the landscape that the soil of the earth had literally flown through his hands, as it had in my mother's side, my farmer grandfather. And he loved that landscape, and he loved the wilderness, and he loved the wild animals, and he loved the whole relationship with it. And I know that it was he who had put that concern and love in me as a young boy, and that we needed to be open to the fact that all people bring to this debate a different setting, a different handling of the things, but ultimately we all come to the same conclusion that this is meaning the land itself, and all that takes place there is something that we should revere and in my mind hold sacred. And that doesn't mean that we designate every acre of land as wilderness, or we log every acre just to get the worth of a board foot of timber off of it, but we see it in its complexity, and then we come to a studied determination decision. One of the aspects of that was made most prominently to me was in the 1970s when Senator Lee Metcalf held a hearing at our request in Kalispell on the Great Bear Wilderness. It was the first big public meeting promoting the establishment of the Great Bear Wilderness. Hundreds of people were there, and among them was my logger dad and my mother, and who were there because I believe that they appreciated the ethic of us caring about wild places. And at that time, in the late 60s and early 70s, we were not there as a nation yet in terms of both respecting and having a process where wild land could be assessed, could be determined, because we were determining things. We had not yet, we were in the throes of, we in Montana, of establishing the first citizen-originated wilderness in the United States, which was Lincoln. Well, we called it Lincoln Scapegoat. It took on the name of Scapegoat when it got before Congress, but we in Montana have always called that Lincoln Scapegoat. Well, just to the north of Scapegoat is a piece of critical land that's the headwaters of the South and Middle Forks of the Flathead River, which is systematically the most important core area for the survival of grizzly bears in the northern Rocky Mountain in the United States. That's not the Northern Rockies in Canada, but the Northern Rockies in the United States. And into that whole mix comes that aspect of the pleasure of hiking and hunting and floating the river and fishing and all of that, of just enjoying the wild country. We were living that out, and I remember with the Great Bear at that time, and I think this was crucial to that insight of a people caring about their land. Again, and I refer that back to that emanating to me from what my father had attuned me to as a boy, to care about the places you are and whatnot. And we in Montana at that time believed what it said in the Wilderness Act. And there was an effort nationally, particularly by the leadership of the United States Forest Service, to say that it and only it could determine what got proposed for wilderness. And prior to that, and I have, if anybody ever wants to get a sense of how the people took hold of carrying and achieving wilderness designation, read the hearing record on the Scapegoat Wilderness, the hearing that was held in Great Falls, Montana, and I believe that was 1968. I'd have to go back, and it might be a little later than that, but I wanted to bring it for this interview, and I couldn't find my copy of the hearing. By the dozens, not by one, two, or three, but by the dozens, Montanans came to that hearing, and what did they talk about? Dissertations on what was going wrong with forestry as forestry, which had been commercialized. We had clear cutting everywhere, and we had if you will, the disuse of public land. We had calamity upon calamity of watershed problems and headwaters invasion of a habitat of bears, grizzly bears, and other things. That's what the people talked about. And so out of that came a conviction, I believe, on these people, who then read the Wilderness Act, which said that the people could propose wilderness areas. And lo and behold, the little group up at Lincoln, primarily headed by my friend Cecil Garland, got that going for Lincoln Scapegoat, i.e. Scapegoat Wilderness. Well, Cecil Garland and I were in Washington, D.C., the morning of the hearing in the House of Representatives to testify at the last public Senate House hearing, and this was in the House, but Senator Metcalf was there and testified, and his staff, on the Scapegoat Wilderness Bill. And we testified. And somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, we got word that it had passed. We had established the first citizen-originated wilderness bill in the United States. Not only set a precedent, I think that motivated wilderness advocates all over the country to do the same. It motivated some of us to do the same in Montana. And that afternoon, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I met with Senator Lee Metcalf, and on behalf of my friend Lauren Kreck and a committee of us that had been working on a place to the north called what would be called the Great Bear Wilderness, we asked Senator Metcalf to carry that bill. So the continuance was, to me, obvious, that we got one bill designated on one day and we started the movement to achieve the Great Bear. Well, at the same time that was happening, there was a group in New York that made a proposal for a wilderness in their area, and then one out of Colorado, and then one in California, et cetera. So this had grown wings, if you say. It started to fly. And here in Montana, over that next 8 to 10 years, we had groups out of Bozeman proposing wilderness, and one of them would become named after Lee Metcalf, and was one of my great honors of my life to be one of the people invited to make the dedication speech at that meeting down along the Madison River, looking up at that incredible piece of ground. I have to express a personal bias that I had always hoped that what we called the Great Bear would be called the Lee Metcalf Wilderness, because of the respect I had for the man in terms of his leadership on public land policy that dealt with a visionary look at the landscape and tomorrow. And be it as it may, it's well enough that we got the Lee Metcalf Wilderness down there. Ultimately, I guess the naming doesn't matter. But out of that came proposals for things. The Montana Wilderness Study Act came out of that movement, and that's been thanks to Lee Metcalf, that's an important piece of legislation, because even today that has wings. It maintains, if you will, an identity of those areas across the state of Montana that deserve study and consideration, and in my mind, designation as wilderness. So I don't know where else to go with that, except that I want to talk quickly about human relationships in this. Across the fight for the, and this is a little known aspect of it, across the fight for the scapegoat wilderness, we fought a congressman from Colorado who adamantly opposed wilderness. His name was Wayne Aspinall, and he was in control. He made it very difficult for us, and I happened to be present at two episodes that to me were crucial in that regard. Both times I was with Cecil Garland in Washington, D.C. And in those days, now security nowadays won't let you do this, but in those days there's a tram that runs from the Senate building and the Representative building to Congress, where they meet. And when they have to go back and forth to hearings, they ride the tram. Well, the public at that time could ride the tram. And some of them walked it. Wayne Aspinall was one who walked that distance. It's about a half a mile. And as he came into the building, I was standing there naively with Cecil Garland, and Cecil fell right in next to him and walked that distance with him and lobbied him. Said, "Why are you opposing our bill, Congressman Aspinall?" On and on. They talked that half an hour to come back. Well, that was crucial to something that happened the day the bill was passed, and Wayne Aspinall voted against it. Okay, but a little bit later after that morning session, we're having lunch in the Cosmos Club. We were there, and Stuart Brandberg had invited us. Cecil and I were sitting there. Don Aldrich was with us at the table eating, and this fellow got up from another table and came over to our table, and lo and behold, it was Wayne Aspinall. And he turned over, he shook Cecil Garland's hand, and he shook my hand, shook Stuart's hand. And he said, "Boys," he said, "I just wanted to tell you," he said, "I don't agree with you at all, but I sure admire your politics." And he turned around and walked off. And here was a man that showed total opposition to us, but he respected our process. And it gave me insight into the political prospect, that you respect the process, you do it right. And we did it right, and we won. And Wayne Aspinall was a man enough that he came over and said, "Congratulations." Now that's a picture of Wayne Aspinall that I will carry to my grave, rather than the one who was nasty to us on the hearing table, because he respected what and how we had got the job done. And for me, it was a lesson to go back and do what we all have to do when we care about a piece of wild land or a animal or a fishing stream or whatever. We have to fight the fight with grace and with determination and good information. And later, that was in the years when, as you read the litany of some of the conservation writing awards that I've received, that was coming on, I frankly considered that handshake and comment from Wayne Aspinall one of the best awards that I ever got in my life.
Wow. And I say there's some irony there with Wayne Aspinall, because during the whole process that took years to get the Wilderness Act passed, ultimately in 64 or 50 years ago, that Wayne Aspinall wanted some things in that bill, if it was going to pass, he had a lot of power obviously in the U.S. Congress, that actually led to something that people on the conservation side were wary of at that time, and that was how it made it possible, a mechanism for get Wilderness Acts passed from the bottom up.
Right.
Through citizen action instead of top-down from Forest Service management, which ultimately, kind of ironically, led to the passage of the Scapegoat Wilderness Act.
That's right. Well, and isn't it interesting that when and I think that little action when he came over to our table bespeaks a man that ultimately believed in the people. And say, "Thank you, Mr. Aspinall," even if we had to fight him. He was a front. He was the person in Congress that led the fight for the mining industry and for the timber industry. and others. But when you had won a fight fair and square, he was man enough to come and say, congratulations. And so I've had a different view of Wayne Aspinall than some people over the years, just because of that. The other things that we're talking in a general sense, and times have changed in terms of our approach to how we achieve the protection of wild land. We do not live in a vacuum. We live in literally a dynamic, ongoing process that has its whoops and warps and its ups and downs and its struggles. And the fight for wilderness today is almost alien from the fight for wilderness of 30 and 40 years ago, mainly because of the change in how we communicate, the change of how interest groups across the wide spectrum for and against the protection of natural resources have both organized and learned to communicate. The internet to a degree, but by and large, I think the major change has been, and I know I was part of this in Montana, that what has been the major change is that today these issues are part of the fundamental dialogue in Montana. That was not the case in the 1960s into the early part of the 70s. And I remember Don Aldrich, who was executive director of the executive secretary of the Montana Wildlife Federation, along with Cecil Garland and some others at the time, were trying to raise these issues in public